together, and so it is. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to talk about a couple of things today, but what we are coming around to through several different approaches, but what we are coming around to is this idea that we talked about last week. The gifts have been given. The presence is already here, but we don't always see that. We don't always experience that. We don't always realize that. Now, the definition of realization, or at least one definition of the word realization, is to fully understand something as a fact, to fully know it as a fact. A realization, in spiritual growth, we call the aha moment, the big slap your forehead, aha, I finally got something. And for me, what happens is when I think I finally got something, then I realize that I'm only beginning again, only beginning. Every time I think I know it, I realize there's so much more. There's so much more. The kingdom is already here, but people do not see it. This is a quote from the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. And in this narrative, one of the adherents of Jesus, one of the disciples of Jesus, is asking, where's this kingdom that you keep talking about? He kept telling people, seek ye first the kingdom. Go within, go to your prayer closet within, go to that special place within. Right? Seek ye first the kingdom, and everything else will be added unto you. Everything. So one day somebody finally said, where is this kingdom? Excuse me, what are you talking about? Where is it? Is it over there? Is it over there? Where is it? And the response that was given was perfect for today. It says, the kingdom is here. It is everywhere present. But people do not see it. Do not see it. We go looking for it there. We go looking for it there. As Dr. Holmes tells us, we look too far away. We look too hard for the presence of the divine. He goes on to tell us, but a mother has clasped it to her breast. A gardener has seen it in the soil. The kingdom, the presence of the divine. I believe that the kingdom that Jesus spoke of was the conscious realization of the experience of the presence of the divine. Experiencing the presence of the divine is being in the kingdom. And it is everywhere present. But we do not see it. But we do not experience it. But we do not always feel it. So let's talk a little bit about realization and awareness and how we can come to know the unknowable, to know the unknown. Now this is a little play on words here, because there are things that are unknown and they are unknowable in terms of the intellect. We've talked about this several times. But it doesn't mean that they are completely unknowable. It means there's a different way of knowing, So we do not, we know the concept of some things, but we do not know them. We understand the concept of infinity, I love studying infinities in math. And they have different levels of infinities. They have the first level of infinity that is so big you can't count to it, but then they have another one, right? Beyond that, and then beyond that they have another one. So they've taken infinities and they've made them finite. Think of how silly this sounds. We've taken infinity and we've made it finite. So this is a finite infinity. And you say, wait a minute. If it's infinity, how can it be finite? How can it have a limit? How can it have a cap? And yet we do this, you see. And my point is, intellectually, the teachers teach us about the different levels of infinity. Intellectually, we talk about infinity as being that which has no end. Right? It just is, and it has no beginning, and it has no end. But we don't realize that. We don't experience that. It's not a fact to us. It's a factoid, if you want to call it that. It's something that we know about, but really we don't know infinity. We don't have the experience of infinity. We are not aware, at least, of the experience of infinity. And yet it is here. It is now. It is within us. It is as us. It is through us. So we talk about this a lot in different discussions, different classes that we have, that there are some things that cannot be known and communicated from one person to another via the intellect, via language, or via our best methods of communications. And I really cannot emphasize enough how limited communication as we have it today is. We have lots of means of communicating. We can talk to one another, we can email one another, we can text one another, and we can even take out a pen and paper and old-fashioned, we can write a letter and we can put a stamp on it, send it to one another. I was taking some classes over at the community college a few years ago, and one of the required classes for the certificate I was going for was just basic English, and there was an assignment, and we were writing a paper, and the teacher came walking around, and this really made me feel old. She came walking around, and she looked over my shoulder, and she says, "Ah, somebody who still writes in cursive." You know. So I was in a class. Everybody in there was much younger than me. Now some of them were not kids. Some were, but some of them were not kids. They were, they had just come home from the military and were starting a new career. But I didn't realize that. Everybody else was printing, and I was still writing in cursive. And the teacher says, "Ah, somebody who still writes in cursive. I get to practice my reading skills in cursive." And I said, "Don't get too excited until you've seen my handwriting. Most people can't read it." But we have lots of different ways of communicating, And yet, if we look at the fundamental issue with it is not very effective. It is not, it gets us where we are, but it really cannot describe everything, because there's what the speaker intends to say, what the way they understand something. Then there's what they actually say. There's the words that they choose to put together and how they structure their sentences and all those things. And then it kind of floats across. It floats across whatever medium we're using, whether it be the air in the room or whether it be the wires of the telephone. All those things, and it's subject to interference, right? We may not quite hear things the way that they said them. There may be noise that comes in, but then there's what they hear, and then finally there's what they interpret. And if you ever want to just test this out, just say something to somebody. Say, what does that mean to you? What did you just hear me say? You remember the game of telephone that we played in school, and they still play it on some of the game shows, where somebody tells a story to somebody and to somebody, and by the time the last person gets it, the story is unrecognizable. So the very, very best tools that we have to communicate are even in matters that are physical, like to describe the dimensions of something, or to describe the instructions for doing something, even something that is that tangible. Our ability to communicate is limited. Now, when we come to discussing the ineffable, the experience of something, especially the experience of the presence of the divine, there are no words. When it comes to love, there really are no words. We have lots of words, we use lots of words, we try to find a way of expressing. But clearly, if I say I love someone, that may have an entirely different meaning to you as to what it means to love someone. And yet we use that word. We use that word all the time. So the example that we use in our classwork is the taste of chocolate, because the taste of chocolate is an experience. There are no words for me to tell you, if you have never had a piece of chocolate, there are no words for me to tell you what chocolate tastes like. I can try to describe it. Well, it's sweet. Well, it's creamy. Well, it's milky. Well, it's this. Well, it's that. But none of those words can create within you the experience of eating chocolate. That is, you cannot have a realization of what chocolate tastes like by me telling you about it. You have to taste it. And then even with that, there's no guarantee that if you taste chocolate, that what you're experiencing is the same as what I'm experiencing. And there's no guarantee that the type of chocolate that you're eating is the same as the type of chocolate that I'm eating. One thing, people who travel to Europe and they come back to America, they look at the chocolate bar in America and they say, this isn't chocolate. This isn't chocolate. The real chocolate is on the other side of the pond. So where I'm going with that is the conscious realization by experience. So if you taste chocolate, if I give you a piece of chocolate, if you never had chocolate, if I give you a piece of chocolate and you taste it, you have the experience. You understand what that experience is, and still it is not an intellectual understanding, because the intellect cannot find words to describe it. But you have a knowing. You have the experience. You have the realization. The kingdom of heaven is everywhere present. It is already here. But we don't realize it. We don't realize it. And that's what our growth is about. That's what our spiritual growth is truly about. To me, that's my opinion of what our spiritual growth is all about. Dr. Holmes calls it the conscious realization. Conscious means we're aware of it. Right? The conscious realization of the experience. We're having an experience. And that experience that we are having is the presence, is the activity, is the love of the divine. In the teachings that come to us from the Middle East, we have a lot of references to the Good Shepherd, right? The Lord shepherds me. I lack nothing. He makes me to lie down in the green pastures. We were just talking before the talk started that we're starting to get into a drought here, and the grass is turning brown. I walked out to the mailbox across the lawn yesterday, and I could hear the grass crunching beneath my feet. And he makes me to lie down in the green pastures. The grass is good grass. And there's not a struggle, you see. We're lying down. He makes us to lie down in the green pastures. He leads us besides the still waters. Right? The water's not moving so swiftly that if a little lamb fell in, it would get washed away. It's not moving so slowly that the water has become stagnant and would make the little lamb sick. So we have to understand that in that culture, from that time, that this idea of a good shepherd was an idea of protection. It was an idea of caring. It was an idea of providing for. See, they did not eat the lamb. They raised the lambs for their wool. They raised the goats for their milk. And they had mixed herds of lambs and goats. And the shepherd is pictured as having a staff with a crook on the top, a little curved piece on the top, right? It had one like that, and it had one stick, a rod and a staff. Right? And that little hook on the top, see, that was the tool that the shepherd used, that if a little lamb started to wander away from the flock, right? So as they walked, the sheep and the goats, they learned that the shepherd was there to protect them, to care for them. If a wild animal came along and tried to take away one of the little ones, see? Well, that's what the rod was for. That's what the stick was for. The shepherd would chase the animal away. You know, I read somewhere that they used to have bears. I don't know if it's true, but I read it, and that much is true, that they used to have bears. And the shepherd would knock the bear on the nose with a stick and chase the bear away. And I'm thinking, if you go to work and you think you have a tough job, let me give you a stick and have you go chase a bear away, and then you'll appreciate the dedication that these shepherds had to their sheep. So the sheep learned to stay close to the shepherd, so that if some sort of danger came up, the shepherd could protect them. And of course the little ones, they didn't know that. They hadn't learned that yet. They were curious, right? They're curious about everything. So they want to run here and they want to run there and they want to run everywhere. And that's what the hook was for. The shepherd could put out the hook and gently, not with a struggle, but gently bring that little one back to the fold. Just gently bring it back. If it fell into a ditch and it couldn't get out, the shepherd could put the stick back in there and could hook that crook underneath the front legs and lift the little one up out of the hole. So this idea of the good shepherd teaches us or shows us a couple of different things to consider. There is a loving relationship. There is a loving relationship between the shepherd and its flock. It cares for them. It protects them. It guides them. It drives away danger. It leads them to the good grass. It leads them to the good water. That's at the physical level. And then when we get to the spiritual or the metaphysical level, what we are getting is an image that when the undisciplined, let's call it that for lack of a better term, when the undisciplined mind starts to wander, when it starts to go willy-nilly, when it starts to go here, there, and explore, that there is a guidance that can bring it back. can bring it back into the presence, can bring it back into the experience of the presence of the divine. So what this has to do with distractions is that if we consider ourselves in our spiritual development, if we consider ourselves to be like one of these little lambs who wanders here and there and everywhere, is playful, is curious, what we can see is that what we really want, according to the story, what we really want is to experience the presence of the divine. But we forget that, you see. The kingdom is everywhere present, but we do not see it, so we go wandering. Remember a few weeks ago we talked about why you are seeking. Why are we seeking? We are seeking because there is that within us which causes us to seek. But yet we don't know what it is that we're seeking. We have to figure that out for ourselves. And we try all different things, We try to find it here, we try to find it there, we try to find it everywhere. But what we are truly seeking is the experience of the presence and the activity of the divine. And when we are pursuing our distractions, we are not experiencing it. We are experiencing the distractions. So now we come to this idea of struggle. I love the quote that Wendy gave us because it's from Columbus. And Columbus, to me, when we look at it, he represents the ways of the world. He was going to set out to conquer. He was going to set out to bring back gold and jewelry. He set out and did terrible things to people. He enslaved them. He did horrible things. All in the pursuit of conquest. And his quote says that we have to prevail. We have to prevail over our struggles, which is to struggle against our struggles. And if you are struggling against your struggles, you can't prevail because you're still struggling. Right? You can't, it's like you can't fight your way to peace. You can fight your way to a ceasefire, but you can't fight your way to peace. I used to work with a man who was very folksy in his wisdom, very practical knowledge. And one of his favorite sayings was, well, you just can't borrow your way out of debt. Didn't matter what the subject was, he would work that line in there. You just can't borrow your way out of debt. You can't struggle your way out of struggles. But our society, our culture, at least here in the West, likes to struggle, likes to fight, likes to win, likes to prevail, likes to dominate, Now, what part of us likes to struggle? What part of us likes to win? What part of us likes to prevail? And I suggest that it is the ego. It is the ego. So we have this thing we call the intellect, and the intellect is constantly analyzing, weighing, dividing, thinking, judging, forming opinions, all of those things. And then there's a subset of its opinions, which I call the ego, which is the intellect's opinion about who we are, what we are, and the way things ought to be. Now, the intellect likes to judge, likes to weigh, likes to analyze, likes to figure things out, likes to solve the puzzle. This is why we like mysteries, right? And the ego is prepared to fight. It is prepared to defend. It is prepared to engage in whatever means it must in order to prevail. I mean, so just look at the movies that we have. How much violence is there in movies? All drama is based on, we meet the protagonist and we find out what their normal world is and what they want. And then an event happens that takes them away from that. And the whole rest of the movie, they're facing crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis until we get to the point where we think there's no way that they're going to get out of this one. And then one of two things happens. They somehow prevail, or they get defeated. Now in our culture, here in the West, the protagonist usually prevails. In other cultures, they like it better when there's a tragedy and the struggle ends and nothing has come of it. And in fact, some filmmakers have to shoot two different endings for their films so that it plays well in two different markets. But if you think of all of the drama, and if you look at TV and all of the drama, it is about struggle. If you look at what's going on in the news with politicians, it's about struggle. It's about we have to prevail, we have to win. And that same idea has crept into many of our understandings of spiritual growth. That in order to grow spiritually, we must fight. We must struggle. We must win. In some teachings, there are hundreds. Most of us grew up with the idea that there's 10 commandments. Now those 10 commandments came to us, and they're a subset of like 40 laws. I think of Hammadi in Mesopotamia, but those 10 are in there. So the 40 became 10. It's probably too hard to keep up with 40. But in some teachings, there are over 600 rules to follow, do's and do nots. And in our first experience, at our first stage of spiritual growth, the focus is on behavior. It is what you do or what you don't do. So there's these 600 things that you either must do or must not do, some combination of both. And of course it's impossible for us as a human being to keep up with that. But we must fight the good fight, and we must struggle, you see. We must remain vigilant. We must be good soldiers. We must be warriors. We must be ready to fight the crusades, and all of these different things that have crept into our Western ideas of religion that make us perhaps feel good that we're doing something, but distract us from the conscious realization of the experience of the presence of the divine. Stuart Wilde wrote a little book, said life was never meant to be a struggle. In the East, we get a concept of Tantra, and the word means no fight, no struggle. Now here in the West, we've kind of taken liberty with what that means. Since it tells us not to struggle, we think that means we can indulge. And that's not what it means at all. Whether you indulge in something or you struggle against it, you are stuck to it. You are stuck to it. You see? And as long as you're stuck to it, you are distracted. So what we want to consider then is that this part of us that I call the ego, this part of us that likes to fight, The intellect likes to be right. The ego likes to fight. If we are to grow spiritually, as we are to grow, if the need to fight is gone, then what purpose is there to the ego, from the ego's point of view, you know? Remember the movie The Princess Bride? At the very end, they ask Mandy Patinkin, they ask his character, what are you going to do next, you know? And he says, I don't know. He says, I've been in the revenge business so long, I don't know how to do anything else. We get in the struggle business for so long that we don't know how to do anything else. The ego does not know how to do anything else, and it becomes, now this is, I'm just explaining, this is, you know, don't take this literally, this is just my way of explaining. It becomes afraid that if you grow spiritually and if there is no need to fight, then it will die. And its whole purpose seems to be to keep you alive. It doesn't care if it's right or wrong, it just cares if you're alive. So as we embark, as we try to engage in this process, in this journey of spiritual growth, sometimes what happens is the ego distracts us. It gives us things to go struggle with. It gives us things to go struggle against. It tells us, yes, I need to do my practice 3 times a day. I need to set my clock and get up in the middle of the night so I can do my practice. I need to read 50 pages a day of a book. I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to do the other thing. And as long as we engage in that struggle, it has won. Because we are not doing our growth, we are struggling. Pema Chodron, Buddhist monk, I read an interesting article by her. She says, for some reason, just be aware of it, but for some reason that we as people, we kind of create a situation that gets us doing exactly the opposite of what we wanted to do. And the example she gave was that she had signed a contract with a book publisher, and she was to deliver a book on peace to them. And she had a deadline, you know. Anybody who's ever tried to write or create something on a deadline, you can relate to this, you know. So she had a deadline, and she had to turn in a certain number of pages by a certain date, and she had to turn in a finished manuscript a few weeks or whatever after they approved the drafts. And at the time, you know, she was living at home. She had grown children living at home, and teenage children, I guess, living at home. And she kept getting distracted. You know, she would want to sit down and write, but you know, had to take care of family needs. She would want to sit down and write, but it was time to go get groceries. Want to sit down and write, but needed to help this one with the homework. You know, I don't know what the exact circumstances were, but you've been there. You know that. You know what I'm talking about. So finally she got to the point where she was hopelessly behind on her deadlines. She had to do something different. So what she did was, when she got everybody to bed and she went to sleep, she would sleep for a few hours, and then she would set the clock, and she would get up in the middle of the night, like 3 o'clock in the morning, so she could write undisturbed. And she figured if she did that, she could write just enough pages in order to meet her first deadline. And of course, you can imagine the struggle. You know, the clock goes off at 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh, I've just gotten to sleep. You got to fight, got to struggle, got to drag herself out of bed. Go downstairs, put on the pot of coffee, turn on the lights, you know. get out the typewriter or the word processor, whatever year this was that she was working, and force herself to type. And she said then she had the aha, then she had the realization. She was struggling to write about peace, you see. Her human nature, if you want to call it that, her intellect, if you want to call it that, her ego, if you want to call it that, kept distracting her, kept her wandering. But there was something within her that reached out with that little crooked stick and pulled her back and said, you are struggling about peace. You can't do that. You can't do that. So I mentioned in the email last night that there was a headline to an article. I didn't read the article, I just read the headline, and it just said that we human beings tend to solve problems by adding complexity, when in many cases it's simplicity where the solution lies. We tend to do that. Now I'm going to just briefly mention that I think the reason that we do that is that our society has equated struggle with value. Anything that comes easily is not valuable. If you go down to the beach, Jeannie said she was walking on the beach this morning. If you go down to the beach and you try to sell sand, nobody's going to buy it from you. There's sand everywhere. All you need to do is go to the store and get a bucket and a pail, and you can have all the sand that you want. See, sand comes too easily. But now gold doesn't come that easily. Gold is a little bit harder to find. So gold has value. So in our society, we have come to the conclusion that no pain, no gain. No pain, no gain. If it's not hard, it's not worth having. If it's not difficult, it's not worth having. And now we come to our spiritual growth, which is the most the most valuable thing that there is. The experience of the presence of the divine. The most valuable thing that there is. The only thing that truly matters. And in that equation, we say, well, then it must be very hard. Then it must be a struggle. Then we are going to have to follow 600 rules, and we're going to have to set the clock at 3 o'clock to get up and pray, and we're going to have to read 50 pages a day, and we're going to have to struggle to control our behavior and make sure that we only behave in certain ways, and we're going to have to struggle to eat only certain foods and modify our diets, and all of these different struggles that we create. When the Bible tells us the yoke is sweet and the burden is light. Come to me as a little children. See, I love the idea of children at play. They come in, they come in from outside. They are sweaty, they are dirty, they are smelly, and they are happy. They have been busy and they have been expending energy. But they never thought of it as a struggle. They never thought of it as work. You see? It was play. So I would say work is the expenditure of energy to accomplish a specific purpose. And play is the expenditure of energy for no specific purpose other than play. There's activity, okay? There's plenty of activity, but the sense of struggle is not there. Can you imagine being 5 years old and getting up and going out and saying, oh man, I got to ride my bike today, I've got to go dig holes in the dirt today and fill them with water, I've got to skip rocks across the pond. Oh my goodness, what drudgery is this? The concept of struggle is not there. So, if we recognize then that our nature, or ego if we want to call it that, tends to make things much harder than they need to be, and that we, human beings, over the centuries have made religious growth harder than it needs to be. And we recognize that drifting off into this sense of struggle, which, by the way, most of the struggles that we engage in only take place inside our head anyway. Right? We're fighting empty battles in our mind that really have nothing to do with anything, but they serve as a distraction. They serve as a distraction. Remember, I told you the story. I listened to a tape, and it was an American Buddhist monk who was leading a 10-hour meditation at a retreat center somewhere. They had all these people come in with their pillows, and they were going to all sit in the meditation hall for 10 hours meditating. We do 20 minutes twice a day, and we think we got it. 10 hours, 10 hours. And he said to them, now make yourselves very comfortable. He says, make yourselves as comfortable as you can be to begin with. He says, but let me tell you this. If I could invent the most comfortable pillow in the world, if I could make a little water bed into a pillow and have you sit on it and have it temperature controlled and have it perfectly to your level of comfort, that in time it would become uncomfortable because your mind is trying to distract you from the meditation. And it does that by giving you sensations to draw you away. So how do we deal with this? Do we fight to end struggle? No, can't do that. Can't borrow your way out of debt. Can't fight your way to peace. Peace is an inside job. What we must do is surrender. What we must do is surrender. And the way that we do this is to become the observer. Become the observer. Right? So if something happens, if you're in a situation and all of a sudden somebody starts yelling and they're yelling at you, and your natural reaction is to yell back and to be defensive and to get engaged. But to somebody standing on the other side of the room, or somebody watching the whole thing unfold on television, they're just an observer. They're not caught up in that. They may get caught up in that. They may think, oh my God, what would I do if they came at me like that? Right? That's what happens to us when we watch the movies, right? Suddenly we become the protagonist. Suddenly we're trying to figure out what would I do next in that situation. We become engaged. And what we must do in our spiritual growth is become the observer of life, become the observer of the struggle. See, just become the observer of the struggle. So if we are mindful, if we are consciously aware of things that are floating into our field of consciousness and floating out of our field of consciousness, and we are constantly aware of when we become hooked, our emotions get entangled and we become engaged, If we can become aware of that, this is our own good shepherd within us, the ability to be the observer. When we become aware of the fact that the struggle is distracting us, we just simply let it go. We don't have to fight to come back to the middle. The observer is always at the middle. We just become aware that there was this tendency to be distracted. But we don't want to be distracted. I just want to observe. See, here's the kind of the essence of it. You remember when I said if you struggle or indulge either way, you struggle or engage either way, that you're still distracted. You're still distracted. So something happens, and we start to become angry. and we say to ourselves, anger, well, that's not spiritual, and I want to be a spiritual being, so I'm not going to be angry. So I'm going to take my anger and I'm going to repress my anger and I'm going to push it deep down inside of me. And I'm going to say, I'm not angry. But of course we are. We're just suppressing it. We're still angry. We're still distracted. Right? And usually what happens is the anger comes out someplace else. The story of the guy who came home and kicked the cat, because something happened at the office. So we don't want to try to struggle with it. We just want to be aware of it. We're going to say, anger is arising. Anger is arising. That's it. That's it. Anger is arising. Because what happens to us is once we become aware that the anger is arising, we become aware of the fact that it is arising within us. And we don't have to engage it. We don't have to be the anger. We can just observe it. And what that tends to do is it dissolves it. It doesn't repress it. We don't struggle against it. We don't push it down. It dissolves into the nothingness from which it came. So as we go through this journey in this lifetime together, as we recognize that we don't want to know about the experience of the presence of God. We don't want to know about it intellectually, because the intellect can't know that. Just like knowing about the taste of chocolate, the intellect can't know that. What we want is the actual experience, the conscious realization of the actual experience of the presence and the activity of the divine. It is everywhere present. It is already here, but men do not see it. People do not see it. Why do we not see it? Because we are pursuing distractions. We are making it harder than it needs to be. Think of the children at play. Plenty of activity. But no sense of struggle. Nearer than your hands and feet. Closer than your breath. Take time, be still, learn to be the observer of the witness of your life. You remember yourself when you were 5 years old? Well, that 5-year-old is gone. You were not the 5-year-old, you were the observer, you see. You were the witness. The body that 5-year-old had is gone. It's turned to dust already. You are not the body of that 5-year-old. You're the witness, the observer. Become the observer of your own life. Take time to practice. This is one of the things that meditation teaches us when we sit down and we try to just simply count. See, this is another thing. When I first tried to meditate, I thought the purpose of meditation was to control my thoughts, to stop all thoughts, to keep all thoughts from entering my field of awareness. I made meditation a struggle, and I failed miserably. The purpose is not to stop your thoughts, just to observe, just to not be entangled, just to let them come, just to let them go. Put your attention to one thing and keep it there. If your mind wanders, reach out with your shepherd's crook and bring it back. Oh, I was meditating. Bring it back. That's it. That's it. God does not have anything to struggle with or against. It is all-knowing. It is all-powerful. That presence is the very center of your being. Find it. Go there. Go to the secret place of the Most High. Dwell there. Keep your conscious awareness there. When a distraction comes up, when a struggle comes up, when something else comes up, let it go. Let it go. And then you will find that whatever you are doing, you can be completely present. You can be the observer, and you can be the actor, and you can observe yourself doing. We can be whole. We can be balanced. We can be love, love, and the presence, and the activity, here and now. Just be it. Don't try to fight your way to it. Don't make it any harder than it needs to be. Go within. Find the love. Stay there. And so it is. Alrighty then. Reverend